It's great to be here. Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. We're in a fascinating time, and I'm in a fascinating job. And I think today what you're going to hear from really the rock stars on our staff, I'm really going to sort of set the stage this morning, but this forum is really all about thinking about the future, thinking about the change in the environment that we are experiencing, and how we need to ensure that our United States Air Force remains the most dominant force on the face of the planet. It's not going to happen as a birthright. We just can't let it evolve on its own. We have to put work behind this. We have to put thought behind this. And so as the forum goes on today, there's going to be a little bit more about what we're looking at with our force design. And I think that's one of those things that it's got a lot of attention, but it doesn't have a lot of dialogue that we've had. There's been some inferences, and so I want to have my team today clarify it, but I want to give it a little backdrop and really set the stage. So I'm going to start this morning with a little bit first on where we are in the progress on our reoptimization for great power competition, because that's one thing it's proceeding apace, but one of the most important things that we're going to do within that is to make sure that we're setting up our Air Force today and into the future to continue to be dominant. So I always start it with this particular slide that I will say. So now we've got AI, so I'm going to make it it's going to be voice activated. When I do this and I think about how we got to where we are, I really go back to one of my formative periods, when I came in during the Cold War, and I think about it sort of in time epics and some seminal events that broke those up. And if you go back to the Cold War, we built our Air Force against an existential threat, something that we had designed our whole force to go against, and we met that threat. And at the end of the Cold War, the wall comes down, and suddenly we don't have an existential threat, but we have our Cold War Air Force, which was dominant, and we went to Desert Storm with that Cold War Air Force, and we won in dominant fashion. But something else happened along the way. Things like the Last Supper in the summer of '93, when there's no threat of the sort of the scope and scale and intensity that the Soviet Union provided, there's no demand for our defense industrial base. So the Last Supper happens in the summer of '93, and then the era of this unipolar moment where we didn't have this existential threat, and so the defense industrial base does mergers and acquisitions, and our Air Force starts to shrink. And when our Air Force starts to shrink, we are making do with the capabilities that we have. And when we're thinking about a force design in the 1990s, we really didn't have an overall Air Force design thinking to the future. Why? Because we didn't necessarily have a specific threat of the scope and scale that's emerging now. So we just continue to modernize by making our platforms a little bit better than what we had before. And then 9/11 comes, another seminal moment. The unipolar moment is over, and we find out that there are adversaries who decide that they can asymmetrically attack our way of life, and so our Air Force adapted once again. And think about it. Think about how our Air Force adapted in the last 20, 25 years. It adapted to the way the rest of the department wanted us to. They didn't need this powerful Air Force that did what our Cold War Air Force did in Desert Storm and in the 90s. It wanted bits and pieces of it. It wanted on-call close air support. It wanted unblinking airborne ISR. It wanted the ability to have the rescuing our forces or our casualties in less than an hour and increasing the survivability. All those things it asked for our Air Force in pieces. And we gave it in pieces, and we were awesome, and we still are awesome. But we find ourselves still doing things in that manner where we're putting pieces of our Air Force out into the battle space and not really training together and cohering as a force. And when we look at that, in the face of the increased threats and the change in the threats, that's where we came up with the idea that we probably need to take a holistic look at our Air Force and see how we reoptimize it for the environment that we find ourselves in. So this is anytime you give enough briefings, you start to have names for your slides. This is my diamond slide. But when you look at it, there's a little logic to it. There are four basic areas that we're looking at with the reoptimization. And if you look at the two on the left, they're really the things that we can do with the extant force today to make sure that the force we have today is more ready and more lethal. And so in the power projection, I'm just going to give you a real quick overview of where we are, because we're still in progress and there's a ways to go. And we're going to make sure we phase this in a way that's executable, but we want to make sure we get to the destination as fast as possible. So in the project power area, again, for the last 20 years, we've sort of crowdsourced the fight. We have pulled from multiple different installations to meet up over in the Middle East, and the example that we give was during the last deployment to PSAP, to Prince Sultan Air Base. We crowdsourced that expeditionary wing from 93 different installations. And we did that because for 20 years, we didn't want to break any individual base. So we sort of just spread the pain a little bit, which is okay if you don't have to train together for complex operations that you haven't done year after year after year. But this environment, if you think about an environment where you may need to go up against a peer adversary in a complex environment and generate combat power from day one, you can't do that by meeting up with your teammates over in the theater. So that's where we are with having a new force presentation model and these deployable combat wings that will train together against the high-end fight and be able to deploy anywhere in the world and be ready to fight. That's coming along pretty well. The organizational structure to support that is coming along well. We've already selected the leaders for the deployable combat wings coming up. Our wing structure to support that, moving to a more robust wing staff. We've already selected those leaders. So that's going to be over the next 2-year period, we're going to see that continue to mature. It's already paid benefits. Even back on October 7th of last year, when Hamas invaded Israel, attacked Israel, we had our first sort of beta test of it. And it was a smaller group, but they had trained together for 6 months or so. And the AFCENT commander said, thank God they got together. They came here and they were ready to go from day one. So it's paying benefits, and we're moving out on that. Generating readiness, the same thing. I'm very, very much looking forward to next summer's RE4PAC exercise, a large-scale exercise, because, again, over the past 3 decades, we've been training individually in small units, or part task training. But have we ever assessed our readiness to do a broader mission and to do it in the scope and scale that will sort of tease out where the warts are, where the gaps are, where the shortfalls are, that we can fix those? We don't know when we just do it in pieces. We can assume that if you can do the pieces, you can do the whole. But you don't know if you can do the whole until you go do the whole. So a large-scale exercise is what we're leaning more towards in the United States Air Force, and next summer's RE4PAC exercise is part of that. I'm very hopeful that we get an appropriation by then, because some of the money, and this is why I put it in my unfunded priority list, is for this large-scale exercise, is to get that in the budget. And I'm hoping that we have success in that, because the size of that exercise is going to be based on the resources that we get, and hopefully we won't be in a CR when we're getting ready to execute. So that's key, because that exercise next summer, it's very much in line with what the Indo-PACOM commander wants for campaigning. It's what the PACAF commander needs to understand agile combat employment, and it's what we all need to learn to figure out if we can really do this agile combat employment and where the gaps are. Because you could do it for a couple days, and you could say, we're a little short here, we're a little short there, but you don't know if that's an annoyance or actually a serious shortfall. And so that's why I'm very much looking forward to this, to large-scale exercises as part of generating readiness. Now, the two on the right they're things we're doing now, but will probably not bear fruit immediately, but they're really for the long term. And the one is in the developing airmen. We're moving out with the Airman Development Command, because as over the past couple of decades, we also sort of had the rise of the functionals. You know, we had each of the functional career fields, really were taking care of the health of that functional career field, and at sometimes, not with malice, but at the expense of the health of the entire whole force. And so having one commander accountable for force development evenly, and making sure our airmen coming in have these foundational competencies that meet the environment within which we expect them to fight, that's going to be a part and parcel of Airman Development Command. And then making sure the human capital is there to support the forces that we're going to field and the capabilities we're going to develop. So that was a very quick run through. I can talk faster, but I don't know if you can listen faster. I want to spend a little bit more time based on to talk about what's relevant to today's, which is in the developed capabilities. Before I get into sort of the conceptual piece of our force design against which we're putting our modernization priorities, I want to go repeat the why we are moving out with this thing called Integrated Capabilities Command. It's the same way that we had done, sort of diffused through the last 3 decades into functional areas. We also did the same way in the way we developed our capabilities. So from time immemorial, these are the 5 things that we've really done. We've called them different things, but these core missions are the things that define what our Air Force does. And we've done them in different ways, and we've done them for different purposes. But again, when we were aligned against the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, we knew what each of those were going to contribute to. It was about air-land battle. It was about follow-on forces attack. It was about all of those things that we had sort of designed our Air Force against. But then when the threat goes away, we continue to modernize our Air Force, but we sort of modernized it, section by section. Let's do better air superiority. Let's have a better platform. Let's ensure that we can have better rapid global mobility by upgrading our airlift platforms and upgrading our tanker platforms. And so we were doing it platform by platform and sort of core mission by core mission, but we didn't necessarily put them all together. And the other things we did structurally was we actually diffused and distributed out the authority and the resources, really, to be able to build those forces out in different major commands. And so if you're a commander of a major command, you do what you're responsible for, and you do it very well. But you really are doing it within your own perspective, within your own view, which is not necessarily the enterprise view. So we are building our Air Force, some of it in Langley, some of it in Scott, some of it in Barksdale, a little bit of it in Hurlburt, and we're putting it together by pieces and then having to integrate it at the end. And that is a problem, because as we're doing that, we're finding we're missing opportunities, we're leaving opportunities on the floor. Now, we have these great rock star people who know how to do that, who have the expertise, but they're separated and they're disaggregated. So this Integrated Capabilities Command is designed fundamentally to put those people together who know how to do this, who are building their force, but who can talk across these core missions and say, I know this is what my platform, what my system, what my command is building, but we're answering in order to do what? Because we don't do these just to do them. We do them to support the joint objectives the nation's need and provide air power for America in a way that's holistic and relevant to the threat and to the environment. And so that's what this Integrated Capabilities Command is really going to be all about. We've already established the Provisional Command, and so we're moving out on that. And the major commands, I will tell you, frankly, just between us kids, it was one of the things that I thought, this might be tough to do internally. But there has been resounding support internal, because there's a recognition by all the commanders and all the leadership in the Air Force that this is something we need to do. And so we're working with each of the major commands to ensure that expertise is matrixed and collaborating, so we can get started on this early and not wait several years to start having this one force design. So that leads us into the discussion that's really going to happen a lot today in this Futures Forum about what are we designing our force against? What is Air Force force design? What are we thinking about, and what is the concept behind it? So this is where it gets a little scary, because this is the environment that we're going against. This is where we are now. These are the threats. They're happening in our peer competitors. They are happening in space. They're happening elevated in capacity, in capability, in complexity, and sophistication, and the environment is also rapidly changing. This is the new context that we have to center and aug ourselves in on, that these are the things against which we need to build our force to be able to fight and defeat and remain the most dominant air force on the face of the planet. So this I was really hesitant to do. So I know as I'm doing this, there's a lot of weapons schools folks out there and a lot of patch wearers. So I just want to tell you all, please, it's conceptual. These are not the actual range rings of action, because somebody's going to go, no. In 1994, that changed, so I know. Please suspend disbelief. And this is just an illustration of sort of where we've come since the Cold War. This was, ballparkish when it was 1990 and Dave Deptula made the master plan and we went and kicked butt in Desert Storm. This is sort of what the overall, get out. This is permissive environment versus contested environment. And there was, before the war started, Iraq had a lot more than they did after we got done. And then through the unipolar moment, we find ourselves in, they're trying to sort themselves out. Everybody is in the 90s. So there was a little bit increasing in capability and in range and depth of the defensive systems of some of the nations. And as we get into 2010, they start expanding out. And again, these shouldn't just be ranges from sites. They should really follow the contours of nations, because they're not only just doing defensive sites and S-300s and S-400s, but it's also offensive capabilities that are threatening surface ships and are threatening bases and are threatening airborne platforms. So, but in general, I'm just trying to pass it on that gets more and more complex, it gets more and more coverage, and the permissive environments become the exception rather than the rule, and the contested environments become more of the rule. And then when you add on fractional orbital bombardment and you add in cyber, basically everything's contested at some level. And so we need to reorient our thinking, not around we've got permissive environments and we've got a couple contested environments we've got to go after. That's changed. So how do you build a force that deals with that? And that's the foundation of our force design, understanding that this is not a binary. 2014, 2015, I was writing for General Welsh as part of the team, and I think I even used the term stand-in versus stand-off. Like there was a door. Okay, now we're standing in, now we're standing off. But that was sort of the perspective that we had. We have to understand that it's really a continuum. And when we think about the continuum, there's really a threat density and a threat sophistication And that varies, as you get closer to whatever the objective is, whether it be the nation's borders or nearby, whether that be in the South China Sea or in the Baltic Sea or in Iran, that there really is this spectrum. And so when you see across the bottom, I'm not going to get too wonky on this. I think I'm going to let Solo do that when we talk about the different sort of categories we're thinking about when we're thinking about our forces. But think about a complexity and density of the threat and how we are building our forces to be able to successfully have lethality and be able to bring combat effects to bear in that environment. And so, again, this is conceptual, but when you think about it, that we have a sort of Mission Area 1, Mission Area 2, Mission Area 3 forces, and I know they can talk about it in more depth, but think about those on a range. Those are forces that need to survive and need to create combat power within a different density, quantity, capacity, sophistication of adversary threats, or how contested is the environment. And so if you think about that, well, there's one way to build a force. Let's build a force that can go against the most dense threats all the time. So let's build a force at the level where they're all Mission Area 1 capable. That would be awesome. We don't have the money. In order to do that, we can't, because if you think about it, all those forces would be capable of penetrating, of living inside, because it's not something you can just outside, inside, being able to generate combat power from within and generate effects that would make the rest of our force just as lethal, just as deadly. I know there's folks at the Mitchell Institute who have talked a long time about things like cost per effect. So we need to understand, if you wanted to build a force that was able to operate in Mission Area 1 and dominate and defeat everything Mission Area 1, that'd be great, but it would be cost imposing on ourselves, and the cost per effect might actually be a little bit much. So there are ways that you can be effective inside, see I said inside, outside again, closer to the highly contested environment. So we need to look at ways that we have those forces that can make our higher end capabilities, our more sophisticated capabilities, more lethal. And so this idea, our force design is really built around a variance in the density of the threat and building capabilities within each of those areas that can be most effective against the threats, whether they be in South China Sea, Baltic Sea, et cetera. So this is really designed around a threat density. It's a little bit nuanced, so it's not just X amount of this or Y amount of that, but if you think about it that way, that it's a threat density that we're going after, and understanding what the best mix of forces is and the best capabilities within that to be able to generate the most cost for the enemy and still preserve the cost of our very highly expensive and highly capable platforms. That's really what this is all about when you're separating it within the mission areas. And so that's conceptually how we're looking at it. But as we move forward, what I want to do is focus on some of the first principles of it. So the team can talk about what type of capabilities you might have, what defines, again, I don't want to put a reach, I don't want to put a distance, I don't want to put a defined boundary that says, oh, this is Mission Area 1, or a defined platform that is Mission Area 1 or Mission Area 2. It is a system, it is a set of capabilities that together can operate with a certain amount of lethality and a certain amount of combat effectiveness within each of those, sort of the variance in the threat density. But there are some first principles that we need to go after. And I also want to use this as an opportunity to clarify sort of some of the things that I think I've been reading. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that was part of our force design. I don't think it is. But here's the things that I think our force design does have as its first principles. And the first is, it really is designed around the changing character of war, in which I think, as opposed to, it's just about South China Sea. Now, admittedly, that is our stressing case. It's our current national defense strategy. That's what the priority is. If that priority shifts, I don't want to say, well, no, our Air Force is built for that. We have to build it for the changing character of war, because a new set of geostrategic circumstances can unfold over the next 5, 10 years. A new area of interest might unfold, a new national security strategy, national defense strategy. So we need to be relevant in all of those. And that's where I think the commonality, why we have this approach of being able to create effects and provide options for our senior leadership and for our president in all those environments is important, wherever they may be. So this is not designed just around that. It is a stress case, because that's what the current national defense strategy is. But I don't want people to leave here thinking that this is a Indo-Pacific force design. So we are stress testing it against the other potentialities. But I think the way you stay safe is have a sort of a decent understanding of the changing character of war and some of the attributes that it privileges. And I've said it once, I'll say it again, and every time I get a mic, I'll say it. I do believe that the changing character of war privileges the very things that are in the Air Force's wheelhouse, that are part of our DNA. It privileges speed and tempo and agility and lethality. All of those things we're born with. And so I think basically the environment is coming to us, and it's our responsibility to build a force and to provide a force to the nation that can do all the things that Airpower can bring. And so this is about the changing character of war, not just about a specific area. And this is also about taking back the offensive. Airpower is best when it's on the attack. You got to have your knife to the throat of the enemy all the time. And if our pattern or our perceived pattern is about, well, the threat density is pretty bad, so we'll just keep backing out. We'll do longer range, and then we'll fight the war from Topeka. We can't do that. We have to be able to do it from long range and make sure that whatever we have from long range can remain survivable, and whether it be the platform or the munition or the effect, that it can be survivable until it hits its target, absolutely. But we need to be able to have that knife at the throat. And that means, yes, being able to fight from afar, but being able to fight close in as well. That's where allies and partners are. In some cases, that's where our bases and our families are. So you bet we need to be able to do that. And but need to be able to do it in a way that doesn't impose so much cost that in the opening days, that's all we got. And that's why the third one is the speed imperative. This is about being able to create effects fast. You know, I worked in EUCOM as a J58 back when we were working on the Russia plan when, you know, Putin did his first shenanigans in 2014. I was there afterwards, and I got to tell you, every time we eventually, after the Cold War in the 90s, what did we do? Well, the Iron Mountain, blow the tip fid. Think people don't know that? You think our adversaries don't know that? They're going to try and create as many effects as they can to put conditions to where it's in their favor before that happens. They want to affect our leadership's decisions. So somebody, some force, some entity has to be able to be quick and have those effects immediately. That's the speed imperative, I believe. And so while we're sorting that out, we need to provide options that say we can degrade, we can disrupt, we can deny early, and not wait. And we can't take weeks to tear down the IADs, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to do it rapidly. That's part of this force design too, to be able to make sure that those forces can create those effects as soon as possible, early, and maybe have a strategic effect before the rest of the services forces get there. Next, I've sort of been saying this, but generate the combat power consistent with the environment. So if you don't need to have uber survivability and massive active and passive defenses, well then don't. But make sure that wherever those forces are, wherever they're projecting power from, they have the attendant survivability, the attendant ability to generate that power at the tempo that stays ahead of the adversary. And that's just sort of a wrap-up of the others. And the last one is sort of been my mantra for a long time, and that is to solve for agility. And I mean this in the way that we procure. Solving for all of this actually gives you operational agility. And that's something we wrote about a decade ago now in the Air Force Future Operating Concept there about operational agility. But I'm also talking about solving for agility in the way that we develop the capabilities. We need to, I believe, we need to forecast into the future and think, given the rapid pace of change and disruptive technology as it approaches faster and faster, we need to balance sometimes it's hubris about being able to predict the future. And if we put so much of our investment in the force design and everything into this one future and don't take account for the fact that disruptive technology could bump us over here, but we are so fiscally committed that we can't pull out of this and adapt, I think we're going to be on our back heels. And I think that's why, as we do this, we need to look at myriad futures and understand what the Venn diagram of most likely is and make sure that we can be on the balls of our feet and we can pivot more rapidly when that disruptive technology, when X or Y happens, rather than hope to God that the one thing that we put all of our money in, that's the future that we're going to see. And so I think solving for agility is in the way that we imagine this, which means a constant revisit of the threat, the advance of the threat, the arc of technology, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be disciplined and rigorous about that, and that should inform our capability development. And our capability development practices need to be able to accept that, take that on, and adapt our capabilities, which is why some of the moves we've made recently with ensuring that the way we develop capabilities is through this open mission systems, government reference architecture, the ability to own the tech base, be able to have software systems over platforms that we can upgrade faster, update faster. I think that's going to be key. And the second part is really sort of this is an addendum to the first, is some of the attributes. And next slide. Attributes. There you go. These go without saying, but I guess they don't. Because I've also heard that, well, we're gonna build quadcopters and we're gonna do all this other thing. Lethality. We're building this force design against lethality. When we're talking about different systems, different capabilities that may not be the most lethal, well, they are there specifically to ensure that the systems that are the more capable, we don't have to grind those down in a cost-imposing strategy. But it is about lethality. That's what they depend on the United States Air Force for, is lethality. So that needs to be at the front of our mind. Survivability, again, is part of that. Survivability that is it's coexistent with the level of the threat, and it's built to the right level. You don't overbuild it, you don't underbuild it, but getting that right, the survivability of it, this needs to be lethal, but it needs to be lethal and come back and survive. So when we're thinking about things like CCA and what the price point is on the CCA versus the survivability of the CCA, we're following that very closely, and the ability to, how much survivability do you build into it? Well, what do you think the likelihood of success is? And can you assume more risk when you do something like that? Can you put them more forward? And there's all sorts of analysis about whether they all die or none of them die. Those are things we want to look at very, very deeply, but understand that there are elements. It offers a new opportunity when you have human-machine teaming, and when you have your operators not only operating their own, but managing a team. We're finding out in at least some of the preliminary things that we're doing in the synthetic environment, they're pretty damn impressive. Our pilots are unbelievable. And moving from this just only taking care of your own platform to managing the system is something it's actually coming along quite well as we look at the autonomy part that we're evolving our Air Force into. But it's the survivability of those uncrewed versus the crewed that we're looking to optimize, because there's a human machine teaming piece that we really need to leverage. Mass is the same thing. Now, mass it's always been, principle of war, it's always been there. But we need to think about mass is it all mass that's designed to go and destroy? And how much of a cost imposition is that on us? Are we on the right side of the cost? We can also think about mass in doing something else. We can deplete their inventories by having massive things that they need to respect and need to honor, but it's lower cost, and we're giving them targeting dilemmas. It's about the outcomes of our missions, not about the missions themselves. So being able to generate mass in order to, at a lower price point, so we can preserve those high-end capabilities, let's deplete their stocks. Let's give them something to think about. So mass is not just about the high-end mass. It's about the mass that ensures that our Air Force missions are supporting what the nation needs and supporting the other services in support of the Joint Force Commander objectives. And then this is sort of underpins it all, obviously. If you're going to have a fight that's going to unfold with unprecedented speed and tempo, the connectivity's got to be there. You have to have more situational awareness than your adversary. You have to be willing to think about things differently, put different capabilities for connectivity on different platforms. I think more about the systems rather than the platform. The system has to survive. The connectivity has to be there to gain the situational awareness, to gain the advantage of being able to think, decide, and act faster than the adversary. That's what this connectivity is all about. And anymore, that's the key. Whether it's the connectivity to understand what you just did to get your BDA and be able to cycle back in, whether it's the connectivity to ensure that either the platform or the weapon can get to its target as intended, no matter how long of a range of the shot is. There's a connectivity requirement there. And there's a connectivity requirement for the comms, et cetera, et cetera. So that really underpins it all. And I think those attributes are fairly self-explanatory, but I think those are the keys we're going into. I just didn't want people to think that we're going to plant a bunch of flowers and let them bloom. The top one is the top one. It is about lethality. As we look at this, I mean, this is not going to be easy. This is challenging, and the adversaries made it challenging. And I'm not going to make news here today. Probably a good idea. But you've heard me say it before, so it's not just because I bleed blue. I said this at AFA, I said this before, as your Air Force Chief of Staff. Like I said, the changing character of war is right in our wheelhouse. We have a lot of mission. And I think the United States of America needs more Air Force. I think they need more Air Force. I think we can see why. I think we can see what we can do with more Air Force. And I think we can provide some capabilities for the nation that we're unable to now just because of how we're stressed, the force is stressed, and we're still doing our very damn best. So it's my job as Chief of Staff to advise our leadership on what I think that we should do with the Air Force we have, but also to be very clear about the things that I think we need if we could have more Air Force. And I think that's something this force design is going to suss out as well, to be able to more clearly articulate. This is the value proposition that Airpower has to our nation. And I think we're fulfilling as much as we can within the resources that the American people give us. My point is, if the American people gave us more resources for United States Air Forces, we could meet more mission. And I am committed to making sure, with whatever dollar we get, this force design ensures that we put the most lethality, the most combat effectiveness, and the best Air Force we can put forward for the nation. That's my job now, while at the same time advising for areas that if we were given more resources, this is how we apply. This force design has to do that. It has to do that. Because the adversary doesn't care about, well, I guess they do care about our budgets, but they're moving on with their agenda. We need to make sure we move on with ours, and that our United States Air Force remains the most dominant on the face of the planet. So I thank you for your attention this morning, for listening to me. Like I said, you're going to get a lot more in the panels that you hear, a little bit more depth, but I just want to set the stage for you and say thanks very much for your commitment, because everybody who's here has an interest. They have a personal and professional interest in not only Airpower for Airpower's sake, but Airpower for what it does for the nation. And so I'll close again by how I open. I want to thank Dave Deptula and the Mitchell Institute for all they're doing for continuing to have the awareness, to raise the consciousness and the advocacy for what I think is so important to our nation, and I've committed my life to, is the most dominant United States Air Force in the history of the world. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.